Okay, Dr. Ashok K. Chauhan, founder, president of the Amity Education Group, Dr. Atul Chauhan, Chancellor, Amity University, Uttar Pradesh, Professor Balvinder Shukla, the Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General S.K. Gideok, Director General, Amity Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies, and Vice President of the Science and Technology Foundation, under whose dynamic leadership and tutelage the Amity interaction has grown by leaps and bounds, as we've been hearing right through this morning. General Anil Kapoor, a friend, colleague, and the DGAUUP and Senior Vice President of the RBAF, Dr. Selvamurthy, Director General of the Amity Directorate of Science and Innovation, ADIS, and the President, Amity Science, Technology, and Innovation Foundation, heads of departments, members of the faculty, most important of all, you, the student community, the determinants of India's future, and the very reason why we have gathered here this morning. Colleagues from the Indian Army who are doing courses in the university on study leave here, a very good morning to all of you. Let me begin by saying what a great pleasure it is to be here on your campus and in your midst. I've been around your classrooms, your laboratories, your library, your communication studio. Amity, I must say, is an impressive campus indeed. I've also been fortunate to interact ever so briefly with members of your faculty and the heads of departments. They all seem to be very inspiring minds. I'm truly impressed, therefore, by the academic environment that has been fostered here at the Amity University, and cannot but help marvel at the vision of your founder, President, Dr. Ashok Chauhan. I'm told that Dr. Chauhan turned 79 on the 24th of October. I hope I've got the dates right. Our best wishes and felicitations to you, sir, on the landmark occasion. As also our collective gratitude for all the noble work that you have done in the field of education and in the service of this country. As a consequence of your sweat and toil today, the Amity Education Group, which is a fine blend of modernity and tradition, boasts of, I'm told, 170,000 students spread across 11 universities and 150 plus institutions. That is 5 times more what I have under the Army Training Command. So it is a stupendous achievement indeed, and I'm sure a cause for great satisfaction. Well, in this conversation with you over the next 20-25 minutes, allow me to explore a subject that has not garnered much traction yet in India, but is the defining leitmotif for national security endeavors worldwide. And that subject is civil-military fusion. So allow me to make a case for robust civil-military fusion in the domain of national security in the Indian context, and let me tell you why we need it so badly. And within the ambit of that civil-military fusion, I shall try and focus on the critical role of the academia and institutions like Amity if we are to become the superpower that everybody was talking of. That may also help to explain the significance of the MOU that we have signed today between the RTRAC, the Indian Army's Training Command, its Thought and Ideation Center, and Amity, which will be, I'm sure, yet another step in the strengthening of institutional linkages between the academia and the Indian military. In diplomatic jargon, I'm told, MOUs are phase 1, but they mean nothing unless they turn into broader alliance agreements. So Singapore just has an MOU with the United States, while Korea, Japan have alliance treaties. MOUs are also, something like you actually don't sign it, but if I were to draw an analogy, an MOU is like a courtship. It has to convert into a stable marriage. And that will only happen if this interaction between the Indian Army and Amity begins to deliver. And delivery will only happen if this MOU turns into quality, because only quality survives in this very competitive world of strategic military affairs. So the MOU is a good beginning, but we have a long way to go. This must convert. Returning to the subject of civil-military fusion, I'll try and develop it through 5 or 6 signposts. We must first begin by understanding or appreciating the salience of the instrument of force, your military, in India's larger statecraft, wider strategic outlook. I'll just spend a minute on that because that's extremely important. Then we'll try and recognize the need and wisdom for fusion between scholarly endeavors and combat pursuits. All countries which are doing well, which are in the forefront of the international pecking order, which are strong military powers, Israel, China, USA, have this very strong fusion between civil and military. And that is what we must emulate in the Indian context. We shall see how and why these silos between the military and academia must collapse, and scholarship and military prowess must go hand in hand. We shall go on to see as to why civil-military fusion is the new buzzword in strategic circles globally. What are the motivations, the roadmaps, and aspirational outcomes? And finally, what are the drivers for emulation in the Indian context? Why India must simply get going with civil-military fusion. What all do we need to do to accelerate the pace, accentuate timelines, and enlarge the scale? If strategic military affairs in India, if the instrument of force, the military and wider defense are to be given momentum, Gati Shakti, which is the new phrase, civil-military fusion, in my view, will be critical. So the first point that I made, we'll just spend a couple of minutes on that, the salience of the instrument of force, the military in our broader statecraft and strategic outlook. Well, long before realists in international relations like Kissinger and Hans Morgenthau ascended the world stage, this is how our homegrown wisdom looked at the positioning of the instrument of force, the military in our strategic frame outlook. Not too surprisingly, this is what Acharya Chanakya said. He said, Yadi apne shastra ko bhuloge, your ancient texts, Yadi apne shastra ko bhuloge, to apni sanskriti khodoge. Parantu yadi shastra ka tyag karoge, to rashtra hi khodoge. Nobody could have said it with greater clarity. China, surprisingly, has adopted best practices from the West, but retained its civilization values and virtues. They never forgot Sun Tzu and Confucius. We, for some reason, I think, took a break from our civilizational connect, and therefore our strategic outlook and a lot of other things have suffered in consequence. Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, a poet from Uttar Pradesh, and I was surprised that the strategic wisdom came from a poet. See what he says. He says, Sach pucho to shar. Shar is also shastra, weapons. Sach pucho to shar mein hi basti hai, deepti vinay ki. Strength induces good behavior amongst adversaries and competitors alike. Sach pucho to shar mein hi basti hai, deepti vinay ki. Sandhi vachan sampuj usi ka, jisme shakti vijay ki. If you have power, the diplomatic dice naturally tilts in your favor, and your voice gets the respect that it deserves in international relations. This remarkable clairvoyance and ideational clarity as to how one should play the strategic hardball is also some prescient advice on some nations, how nations could gain ascendancy in the strategic competition, comes to us from our homegrown wisdom. Very surprisingly, Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of non-violence, also drew our attention to the value of power. He said, true power speaks softly. It has no reason to shout. The Yudh Kundam, the manual of war, talks of Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed. Bharat Karnar tells us that when interpreted in the strategic foreign policy sense, the purport is national interest by means fair or foul. Fair or foul. So these diverse voices epitomize realism in international affairs, emphasize the value of power in international relations, while concurrently underlining the relevance, the utility, and salience of the instrument of force, your military, in the power dynamic. Not, I must point out, as an instrument to jackboot around the world, not as a blunt in-your-face tool, but a sophisticated, calibrated, technologically enabled instrument, one which is propelled by agile bureaucracies, that is applied with discretion in the resolute pursuit of national interest. And as technologies grow, tomorrow's armies cannot merely be armies of attrition. They have to transform into armies of cognition. Such an instrument, when meshed with other levers of power, and they all are important, diplomacy, economic heft, soft power, can do wonders. If we leverage them with wisdom, the military's many softer attributes as an influencer, the lever of military diplomacy, by way of deterrence for politico-military signaling, as also its hard surgical proficiencies that we need at times. If we do all this with wisdom, with vivek, we could strengthen India's national security dynamic by several orders of magnitude. Now, all this is easier said than done, but in all of this, academia has a vital role, both as an accelerator and as an enabler. As a vehicle for thought and ideation. Thought and ideation are extremely important to militaries in fashioning our strategic outlook, in structuring a policy roadmap for the long-term addressal of China, for instance. The Americans have come up with a document called the Longer Telegram, which says in 30, 40 years how China must be tackled. China's roadmap today, we all hear of China becoming the supreme power here in technology, in military. It was set out by Deng Xiaoping as far back in 1962. In 1980, Deng Xiaoping said, the Middle East may have oil, but China has rare earths. Today, as far as digital combat, digital transformation is concerned, China leads because it leads in processing rare earths. So this is how far we have to look. And if we have to look so far, such thought and ideation will have to come from universities like these. In putting together a response stratagem for developments along our western horizons. See what's happening in Afghanistan, Taliban, Pakistan, China, Iran, new axes are developing. In research endeavors, in our capacity building, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the startup sector. I will recount some examples to you. And after I finish, I really look forward to any questions that you may have. Empowering these startups that have sprouted in India, military startups, in growing them into unicorns, by helping the military in its many HR initiatives. So it's not about technology alone. It's this whole, what shall I say, ocean of knowledge. We need new talent pipelines. How do we create them? Emerging domains like space and cyber need different kind of talents. In helping us embrace new age skills, in helping us grow our thought leadership, in generating leadership capacities to herald change. Change leadership is not important. All these aspects will come from institutions like Amity. And therefore, the great salience of ideation and thought. Modern military enterprises, may I also point out, need to nourish their traditional attributes, valor, group cohesion, discipline, combat resolve. All these are extremely important, but they need to be nourished with innovation, creativity, and critical thinking. Such endeavors, once again, in such endeavors, the academia could play a stellar role. So that then is the essence of civil-military fusion, the coming together of diverse domain attributes, specialist skills, unique talents from civil and military alike in the pursuit of national security endeavors. It was civil-military fusion which built the United States. It was civil-military fusion which is building China. We cannot afford to lag behind. If India has to prevail and surge ahead in the intense strategic competition that engulfs us, and you are seeing it, what's happening along the LAC, what's happening along the LC, there are new threats emerging from our maritime frontiers. I don't think there is a nation which faces such accumulated strategic adversity as India. And if we have to face up to it in the technological realm and all the other aspects that I spelled out, the best of talent from civil and military spaces have to come together. National security, challenges in national security cannot be addressed by militaries alone. I mean, I have the humility to acknowledge that. It is such a wide space that every bright mind, every talent, every attribute, every domain specialist will have to come together. Knowledge convergence. May I also say that the outreach that we seek with academia, as I said, is not in the arena of science and technology alone. Technology is extremely important. They say technology today is geopolitics. Technology is power. Technology is a core combat attribute. It has virtually become a principle of war. Yet, other domains, as I pointed out, international relations, strategic affairs, country specializations, domain expertise. For example, space and cyber. It's just not about the technical aspects of space and cyber. Outside, people are specializing in the geopolitics of space, the geopolitics of cyber, the geopolitics of chip technology. All these issues, they are begging for original research and deep scholarship. Original research and deep scholarship. So it is in all these domains, I would request that the MOU that we sign, once it gets going, we broaden our endeavors, because it is in all these areas that the military needs you. I mean, you should enrich us, and we will try and nourish you. We need to break these silos of mechanical excellence. We have silos, academia, DRDO for technology, the military, business, but these silos need to collapse. They need to transform into collaborative endeavors of creative delivery, ones that stay ahead of the curve. They are ones that are innovative, inventive, risk-taking. Risk-taking is an element which will have to be brought in. Agile bureaucracies. Why are we collaborating with the private sector, with private universities? Because agile bureaucracies is not something which comes to government naturally. So it is these qualities of innovation, energy, enterprise, agile bureaucracies, risk-taking. All these issues are needed in this whole, this domain of civil-military fusion that I was alluding to. So I would argue not only domain specialization, but more critically, knowledge convergence, because that is where the strategic advantage lies. I'll give an example of a gentleman called Andrew Marshall. At least the military minds would have heard of him. He was a strategic genius who pioneered net assessment for the Pentagon, was advisor to 8 American presidents on both sides of the political divide. He fashioned the downfall of the Soviet Union. He predicted in 1980 that China would be something to worry about in 2015. He had great contributions to make in net assessment. What was he? He was a student of history, literature, economics, and statistics, but he found his true calling in strategic affairs. So the point I'm making, it's not of these silos of science and humanities. Once again, there needs to be convergence. And what did he do? The great service that he did to the United States was that he mentored talent. And this talent went to industry, it went to think tanks, it went to the US military, it went to the academia, and over decades, all of this came together collectively to lay the foundation of the formidable American defense enterprise. And this is what China was watching all these years, and for the last 20, 30 years, they have done diligently so well that today the Americans are worried of being outperformed. And once again, civil-military fusion. So these cross-domain flows between military, academia, business has become a tradition in the United States, which has been honed over the years. And now there doesn't seem to be any difference. You take Stan McChrystal. He commands the ISAF in Afghanistan, writes that lovely book, Team of Teams. Today he's a fellow at the Yale University. He teaches courses on leadership. Dave Patrius, we all know, Commander-in-Chief of CENTCOM, once upon a time, today visiting professor at the City University of New York. He's got a professorship at the University of California. He's a senior fellow with the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, Harvard, John F. Kennedy School of Government. So this is the point I'm making, that we need the rigor of academic research to enrich the military, and military experience and expertise in turn, which would nourish academias, some of which I see happening at the Amity, and therefore it really gladdens my heart. I'll give you some more examples of how this coming together is so important. So the UK, when it was faced with a major procurement crisis, I think about 15 years back, and they couldn't find a pathway, a middling pathway between the defense services and the bureaucracy, what did they do? They bring in a gentleman called Bernard Gray, who's got nothing to do with the defense. He's not a civil servant. He's from the corporate world, the world of media and communications. And he comes, studies the subject in 3 months, and transforms procurement there. Yet another example of civil-military fusion. David Packard, co-founder of the Hewlett-Packard Group, this very famous corporate chain, he was Deputy Secretary of Defense in the Nixon administration. And there are countless examples in America and China. The National Security Commission report on artificial intelligence that was being talked about today in the United States is authored not by some general, but by Eric Schmidt. I think he was founder of Alphabet and Google. So this is how the corporate world and the military, academia, everybody is coming together. And this is what we need to do in India. For this to happen, the silos that we have grown since 1947, the stuff pipes that we have structured will need to collapse. When I was young, I was told you only fight, you don't make technology. You don't think about technology. I don't think that was wise at all. So today we need academia, technology enterprises, scientific establishments, hubs of excellence in business and commerce, entrepreneurs, startups, the armed forces, the civil services, thought leaders and strategic affairs experts to come together to build the defense enterprise that we aspire to. Without this, it will not happen. Everybody needs to come together. You know, when I was young, there were these famous debates, pen is mightier than the sword. Actually, the pen is as salient as the sword, or vice versa. Those debates itself are foolish. Pen is mightier than the sword. Look at the wisdom of these great minds in the past and how we destroyed that wisdom. Thucydides, and I think most military officers have heard it, the Athenian historian and general said that a nation that draws a sharp distinction between its soldiers and its scholars will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. And I think we made this distinction, unfortunately. This MOU with the Amity would have been unthinkable 8 to 10 years back. So these things which are happening, they are actually historic, and we must make full use of them. The French philosopher Henry Bergson said, think like a man of action, act like a man of thought. So thought and action, ideation and delivery are complementary and not contrarian endeavors. It is this which must go from our country, which is now going. If that goes, civil-military fusion will take off. And I've seen the great talent. So last Army Day, 2 Indian startups, they swarmed drones. And in less than 9 months, we have placed orders of 200 crores each of these. As our chief keeps saying, that unless you convert this into orders, unless these MOUs become alliance agreements, unless these promises convert into orders, the startup world, military startups will not take off. And all this will not happen unless civil-military fusion, in every sense of the term that I tried to explain, takes firm root. So ये सिर्फ कहने की बात नहीं है. It's just not a matter of seminars and these MOUs. It has to get into our minds, our hearts, and our souls. And that is the central pitch that I wish to make, that we really need to break silos, because the challenges are so great that it has to be talent from any quarter, talent of any hue. Only the best must survive. Only the best will survive. That's how intense the strategic competition is. It's also the central lesson from the pandemic, if you think carefully, because the pandemic tells us that everything is national security. And if everything is national security, then everybody needs to come together. I'll just try and explain this to you. So the pandemic began as a health crisis, but it soon metamorphosed into a major national security event in regions and across the globe. We saw the interdependence of technology and global supply chains coming to the fore, because all vaccine products were not available in a single geography. The value of techno-alliances, then the politics of international vaccine flows. You had these hierarchies between mRNA vaccines and vector-based vaccines. Then you had this vaccine apartheid for a while, AstraZeneca being recognized, Covishield not being recognized. So geopolitics creeping into a health crisis. Pfizer, I'm told, in exchange for vaccine supplies to Argentina, sought sovereign military bases as collateral guarantees. And then brutal geopolitics came from the pandemic. We saw what happened in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, and along our line of actual controls. So what began as a health crisis ultimately turned out to be a major national security event. Today, they say the index of competitiveness in COVID times, your ability to stay connected with the least number of lockdowns, how you can keep your forces protected. The biggest challenge for the Indian Army is to first ensure force protection, because only if you're secure from COVID will you be able to do what you have to do along the LAC and the LC. Training through COVID, I saw what a huge problem it was in our track. While colleges and schools shut down all over the country, our institutions couldn't close because people had to train and they had to go to the borders. So we saw those challenges. But all this, the index of competitiveness in COVID times, will shape the pecking order in the post-COVID world. So you see a new interconnectedness between health, diplomacy, statecraft, geopolitics, military postures. So I tend to conclude that everything today has a national security connect. This pandemic, you explore the blue economy, climate change, everything has national security implications. When I was younger and somebody told me climate change has national security implications, I would yawn. No longer. I know it has a grave national security economy. So the point, the lesson from the pandemic is that all of us need to take a wide-angled view of national security. We need to develop integrated worldviews, because the challenges today are so complex and so intricate that solutions cannot be found by singular institutions. They cannot be found by the military or our diplomatic corps alone. Everything is so interconnected. And once again, therefore, the argument. Now, the state of civil-military fusion in India, to be honest, is not very healthy. So we have to move from cooperation to collaboration to cross-pollination, complete dissolution of silos, and thence to total civil-military fusion in ideations, in capacities and talents, if we are to prevail in the strategic military competition. And in this transition, there are great opportunities for all of you, for the value of original research, scholarship, ideation. We are opening centers of excellence. We've opened a center of excellence for AI, center of excellence for quantum, exchange programs, capacity building, strategizing. There's a gentleman called Rush Doshi who's written a book called The Long Game, how the Chinese played the long game with the US. You have to see how people thought and how early they thought. And all these things happened in academic institutions. Rush Doshi is an academic, but today he's now part of the State Department because of that great book of his. This long game which he wrote is actually the Chinese strategy for the US. Now he's been asked to work out a strategy by the Americans against the Chinese. All this kind of technologies. Historical research is so important because it's a vast early warning system. So, all these issues have to be done. Concurrently, we need an enabling environment, agile bureaucracies. Technology by itself will do nothing. And here, I must make a point to you, just to point out the mistakes that we have perhaps made. So I'm told Bill Gates told Warren Buffett that if you could hire from only one university in the world, it should be the IITs. Now, if the IITs were such a brand, I think the Indian Army made a great mistake by not reaching out to the IITs. And today we are grappling with technology deficits. Our imports are so high, and here were the IITs, which was supposed to be the world's best system. And it may be true, because not too many years back, the boss of the DARPA, the great DARPA in US, was R.P. Prabhakar. We are going about innovation. The Defense Innovation Unit a couple of years back was headed by Raj Sharma. So because we didn't interface with all these IITians, they went abroad. It's an old story, but it needs to be repeated. If Bill Gates thinks that the IIT is the best recruitment or the best center for talent in the world, the Indian Armed Forces should have outreach to them much earlier. So it's in that spirit that we are taking these steps, towards civil-military fusion. We wish to invest in academia so that we can reap the fruits. Very quickly, I'll tell you about global metrics in civil-military fusion. See what the world is doing, and this is once again an eye-opener. Civil-military fusion, may I assert, figures prominently in the geostrategic calculus of all major military powers. The collective skills of scientists, soldiers, technologists, young entrepreneurs, corporates, interns, dreamers, startups are all being leveraged. Let me give you a few examples. China's National University of Defense Technology, under this 1,000 Talents Plan, has hired 10 of the top of the line professors from across the world, including the American National Alamos University, to drive cutting-edge military projects. They have opened military talent recruitment stations in a host of cities to include Auckland, New York, Madrid, and Zurich. This is what China is doing, 1,000 Talents Plan to stay ahead of technology. In a humbling moment for the Defense Secretary Ash Carter, I think a decade back, he paid a visit to the Silicon Valley, and Elon Musk told him, he was telling the Silicon Valley to come up with projects for the military. And Elon Musk, maybe in a, what shall I say, a dash of humor, but also some realism, said, Mr. Secretary, I don't need to travel to you, you need to travel to us. And Mr. Carter traveled to the Silicon Valley. Because, as Elon Musk pointed out, he said, we have the talents, we are ahead. Those days are gone when DARPA had all the military wherewithal and technological knowledge. That's a fact. And seen consequent today, the endeavors of the US Space Force are, of course, being driven by the US Space Force. They've got the former head of NASA, but who is one of their main collaborators? Surprise of surprises, Elon Musk. So space, a domain like space, is now, you have the private sector coming in. The military can't do it by its own. The $10 billion JEDI contract, Joint Enterprise for Defense Infrastructure, which is basically the cloud contract of the US military, might go to Microsoft or Amazon. No longer to any government organization. So this is what talents are, is doing. China, of course, military-civil fusion is the ideological mooring of the CCP. It's driven by President Xi himself. So he travels to the infantry school, travels to a university. He travels to civil colleges, travels to the artillery school. So this is what civil-military fusion is being, the manner in which is happening. Look at what the Chinese did in the field of quantum. And I'm giving all these examples just to drive home the fact that civil-military fusion is really required. And we really need to do a lot. So they pick up one of their brightest scientists, a man by the name of Jian V. Pan, send him for a PhD under Professor Anton Zellinger, the best known in quantum, best name in quantum 10 years back, to Austria's Heidelberg University. 3 years later, he comes and makes the quantum satellite. Now he's working on the quantum radar. And anybody with even peripheral interest in the military will tell you how quantum is going to change the entire dynamics in warfighting. Now, this is how forward people are looking. Israel's units 8200, 9300. They're once again masters of space and cyber. They are not these hierarchical organizations. They are flat in terms of hierarchies, fleet-footed in outlook, technologically the best in the world. What is their motto? Talent, quality, and enterprise. Talent, quality, and enterprise. So they pick these 18 to 21 years old from the best colleges and universities and give them unique career paths. So you can work in Unit 8200, 9300, be associated with the Stuxnet, be associated with disabling of the Syrian radars. No theories. Day-to-day operational experience. And the best part is that they let them go. You want to leave after 3 years, you go to Silicon Valley. You want to leave after 8 years, you go. So our entire recruitment system will have to become much more flexible. The Americans, to get the best names in space and cyber, I'm told get officers, say at a rank of lieutenant colonel, get them at a higher pay scale, 8 years, and then they go. So the militaries will have to change their mindsets if we have to get these kind of talents. So this is, the way we have to travel. The PLA has signed or has opened defense labs in 160 universities across China. The US Army Futures Command has signed MOUs with 300 top colleges and universities. I think we've just signed 8 or 10. So this is the whole path that we have to travel. And look, see how conversion is happening. It's no longer theory. So you had this recent op Guardians of the Walls, which was this Israeli offensive against the Hamas. It was driven by capacities in artificial intelligence. An advanced AI platform was created, which was manned by these top-of-the-line minds in cyber and space. It was a combination of supercognition, lethality, and sophistication, and 3 operational outcomes. So they use facial recognition techniques to target the top Hamas commanders. So the brigade commander of Gaza, Bassam Issa, the cyber chief, Joma Tohola, the head of the strategic projects, Jamal Zebda, they are gone in 48 hours. Facial recognition. They use big data techniques to fuse all intelligence with respect to the famous Hamas underground tunnel network, depth, thickness, route alignment, and strike at 4 critical points. In the next 72 hours, the tunnel is rendered unusable. So no theories, delivery, facial recognition, big data. They devise an Alchemist tablet-based program which alerts tank commanders to possible attacks a minute or a minute 30 seconds before the missile is fired. So the last time the Israelis had 220 casualties, this time they had 1, Sergeant Omar Tabib. So this is how civil military fusion, technology, everything is coming together in some of these countries that I told. The PLA powers Huawei. Huawei drives 5G. So the military 5G is now along the borders. No silos. Today there are huge projects of facial recognition and autonomous vehicles in China's biggest cities. PLA teams are already embedded into them. So that's the distance that we need to travel. The last point that I would like to make is that, for too long we have valued processes. Now, processes are important. They're important for financial fidelity and so on. But processes can't become an end in themselves. Very interestingly, there's a gentleman called Wang Weiwei, one of the advisors to President Xi, who was tasked by President Xi when he took over in China to do a study on the weaknesses of democracies, which will include India. Look at this clever study, weaknesses of democracies. And let's skip the others. The third point in that is the obsession of democracies with processes and procedures. And he goes on to say, strangle them in their own systems. So this is a strategic cunning. This is how civil military fusion is working in these places. So we really need to step up our game in terms of ideation, thought, the way we look at strategic competition, the way we need to bring together all talents. And unfortunately, China is not a distant superpower. It's your neighbor. So we really have to, step up the game. The Israeli system is such a wonderful system because of conscription. What happens? So their best minds in academia, the business, in commerce, in the government, I'm talking of the non-military minds, since they have a conscription system, so every year these minds return to the military. So a scientist returns to the Israeli army and patrols for 2 weeks. An academic may return to the Israeli Air Force and fly for 2 weeks. And similarly, somebody may return to the Navy and sail for 2 weeks. So there is a great understanding between what the military wants and what the civil spaces can deliver. That natural convergence didn't happen in India because of all these silos for all these years, and will take a lot of time to really convert into delivery because we still have the way we operate. Now, I'm not making a case for conscription, but I'm just telling you how these systems work. And we really, therefore, need to step up to this whole thing. I can give you so many other examples. I'll give you a statement of the Commander-in-Chief of the US Space Command. Now, the normal belief or at least the understanding is that bright minds will never come to the military because the corporate world pays so much more. So the Commander-in-Chief of the US Space Com, this is in 2018 or so, says that the retention rates in the Space Com and the Cyber Com were 80%. And when he spoke to the bosses of the big tech companies, their retention rates were 30 to 40%. So he concludes that while the salaries may be more there, people come and associate with these projects because of the prestige with strategic projects, the prestige of associating with the military. So this is also a dynamic which works. This is a dynamic which works and which we must explore. Now, having seen the drivers and logic for civil military fusion, there's also global trends in the domain. Where do we stand in India? Well, as I said, most honestly, we were late starters, but we have begun to move. And this is a point to make. Both the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Defence Minister have emphasized the importance of the subject ad nauseum. The CDS has been talking about it. The Chief of the Army Staff, I know, is a passionate advocate of civil-military fusion. So the Indian Army over the past 2 to 3 years, in all humility, has taken more than baby steps, because we are clear that yesterday's thinking and structures are simply not good enough to measure up to tomorrow's challenges. We are opening up our universities, we are opening up to universities and institutes of higher learning. We are opening our institutions to them. So today our ranges are available to the private sector to test. Our laboratories are open. We are doing internship programs in 3 innovation hubs that we've set up. So in Pune, Hyderabad, in Bangalore, we've got interns from universities. We've set up these 2 centers, as I said, for AI excellence, quantum. We are getting interns from outside. We are getting academics from outside. In this whole spirit of civil military fusion. We've done these now with RRU, BISAG, IITs, IIMs, Indian Institutes of Science, the MIT, TIFR, Amity now. And we are not looking for any brands. I mean, while IIT may be great, we don't get impressed too easily. We are interested in delivery. Anybody who delivers, from our side, we'll do our best. We're just doing a nationwide hackathon for talent spotting, internship opportunities, and building up of domain expertise at the cost of about 1 crore, which the chief inaugurated 2 to 3 weeks back. It's currently on. And we are doing it in things like drone hacking, IoT hacking, malware, reverse engineering, codes, algorithms, so on and so forth. So it's just not talk. Things have started, yet I'll be the first to admit that we have a long way to go. I gave you this example of drone swarming, which we have successfully concluded. And I'll just quickly list out a whole lot of other projects which are actually on. So it is just no talk. So in robo-mules, exoskeletons, AI applications, simulations, microsatellites, wargaming, blockchain, low-light imaging, electric vehicles, fuel cells, anti-drone systems. And these are the startups, some names you would have not heard, but they have got contracts with us. So Messrs. iDatum Research, VM Technologies, Unistring Technology Solutions, Kaya, so on and so forth. Just to make a point that all that we say is not, it's not just talk, we are walking the talk. We are outsourcing studies to universities and think tanks. So how to get specialist verticals going in the army. The stuff I was talking about, how to get space and cyber professions and civil military fusions. What are the aspirations of next generation officers, next generation youth, and how do we align them with the needs of the armed forces? So that's a challenge by itself. So we are looking to do more. We are looking to get more ambitious and aspirational. As I said, there are opportunities galore. Any ideas, suggestions, feedback that you have for me today or later will be most welcome. And there are so many areas of research, as I said, new areas, hypersonics, outer space. I gave you the example of long game. So defense, in my view, is a space buzzing with opportunities today for pure research, innovation, energy, and enterprise. And it is relatively greenfield because it was closed all these years. It's suddenly opening up. There are huge opportunities. We are also willing to fund failures because we know that some of these things will not work. They will fail. I gave you the example of rare earths. There is this whole buzz about building digital capacities in the military. So we are looking at algorithmic warfare, transition to digital combat, which will all need the kind of expertise that exists in universities like this. I'll end by giving you this small example of this huge space in the startup and unicorn world. So I'm told India today has 55,000 startups and 58 unicorns. Collectively, they have created $350 billion of value, provided employment to 1.4 million. But by 2025, and if this is true, it is very significant. By 2025, we may have 100,000 startups, 150 unicorns, $1 trillion of value. It will employ 3.5 million people. And within this, see the huge opportunity for defense startups. So we are interested in defense startups. So if any of you have ideas, the mission mantra of your founder, President, I read, is attack the opportunities. I submit as a glorious opportunity. Do try and exploit it. Do consider it. I'll conclude with that, and I do hope that I made a persuasive case for the coming together of academia and the Indian military to lay the edifice for a strong, or at least vastly strengthened, national security posture. We can't do it alone. We need all of you. This MOU between Amity and our track may just be the trigger, the inspirational trigger that we all were waiting for. In the same breath, may I say that true religion begins once the prayers are over. So what we do by way of honest, diligent follow-up action once this event terminates will determine the impact of our very good intentions. So thank you very much for your time. Jai Hind. And I'm now open to questions if there are any.